Hi, you're watching us on NewsX YouTube. My name is Devika Chopra. With me is Rishabh Gulati. And Rishabh, today we're going to be discussing something that a lot of people would in fact be interested in, and a topic that we don't usually talk about. It's the breakup of China. So to begin with, Rishabh, if you can tell us a little bit something about, the balkanization of China.
The thing is that we always draw the assumption that because of the closed system and how little most of us watching this, this YouTube broadcast would really understand of China. So we think that China is one homogeneous region. Okay, it's one big red country and everything is alike. When that is far from the truth. The original China, which was what is the core China, okay, it's called proper China, only amounts to about 18 of the provinces that were the heartland of the Qing dynasty, the heartland of the Han race. Now the Han race of China, which is 90% of all Chinese, dominate these regions, and they have subsequently dominated regions around them. Now a large measure, Devika, why Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China are doing this new Silk Road, one belt, one road. The first step of the new Silk Road and OBOR is not just about global trade, it is about literally connecting China, because the disparities are so strong between the eastern seaboard, okay, which was the epicenter, Huawei, which was the epicenter of the coronavirus, land is in proper China. The eastern seaboard, which has Guangdong, which has Shanghai, and if you go up north, towards Beijing, this is the wealthy, rich part of China. The northeast of China, the northernmost province of which they call the autonomous region of Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet. These are places that are being crushed by the Chinese. They were never a part of China proper. They have been subsequently forced into subservience in a national territorial system that has now emerged in the new way which we look at maps. And they have been in constant revolt and rebellion for many, many decades. Now, if you look at core China, what China actually is, it restricts itself to about 18 of these provinces, and these provinces are Anhui, Chili, Fujian, Gansu, Guangdong, Guizhou, Hebei, Henan, Hubei, Hunan, Jiangsu, Jiangxi, Shaanxi, Shandong, Sichuan, Yunnan, and Zhejiang. And even Yunnan was, for the most of Chinese history, an independent principality. And even today, it has autonomous traits. So that is the core China. It is restricted to the eastern seaboard. And if you just want to imagine the map of China, the eastern seaboard consists of these 18 provinces. Then towards the northeast, which is the northern part of the Koreas, the Korean peninsula, which was originally Manchuria, that has those 3 eastern provinces. Then north of the Great Wall, remember Beijing is towards the northeast. The Great Wall runs slightly north of Beijing, and then along sort of the Yellow River area. North of the Great Wall was what was Mongolia, but they have a Chinese province called Inner Mongolia now. The rest towards the west, the massive province of Xinjiang and Tibet. Now the Chinese divide up Tibet into 2 parts. One is the Tibet for them, which is the autonomous region, and the other is the province of Qinghai. Actually, this was all of Tibet. All the major Chinese rivers, whether it be the Yellow River, whether it be the Yangtze, all of them originate in the Tibetan plateau, and the Tibetan plateau includes all of Qinghai. So the vast majority of the territory of China are under these so-called autonomous regions, autonomous provinces, Devika. And by autonomous provinces basically means that the Chinese are subjugating the peoples living here, whether it be the Buddhist monks of Tibet, whether it be the Muslim Uyghurs of Xinjiang. These people are being subjugated. They are not the core Han race of the Chinese people, and they are trying to do this with demographic dividends. So the 18 provinces, that is the core of the Han race, okay? On the north, as I mentioned, you have the Yellow River, basically the Yellow River Basin and the Yangtze River Basin. The origins are in Tibet. And, if you look at the reality of not only the economic development, but the path of progress of China as it went from the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911 then through the Republican phase under Sun Yat-sen, then Chiang Kai-shek, and finally the Communist Revolution which happened in 1949. All of these provinces played a very, very important role, and I'll delve into the history of them one by one with you, Devika.
Absolutely, Rishabh. Then let's begin with the first autonomous region that we're going to be talking about, Inner Mongolia, if you can shed some light on that.
Look, Inner Mongolia is basically Mongolia, okay? We all know about the Great Wall of China. Why was the Great Wall of China built? The Great Wall of China was built to protect the Chinese kingdoms, the Middle Kingdom and before, from invaders from the north. Who were the invaders from the north? The Mongols, okay? So Inner Mongolia lies north of the Great Wall of China. So never a part of the traditional Chinese realm. What happened was that when the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, there was Mongolia which wanted to be independent. So they established a Khanate, a Mongolian Khanate under a Khan called Bogd Khan. These are the people who took lineage from the Kublais and the Chagatais and the Genghis Khans of the world. So they formed a Khanate. Now, when the Khanate was formed, Outer Mongolia was created under Bogd Khan. But some of the members of Mongolia, they wanted, because of internal rivalries, they sought assistance still from Beijing. Okay, and at that point of time, Beijing was, not really the epicenter of Chinese fate and establishment. It was much to the south in Nanjing, Shanghai, much closer to the colonial areas. So, in this region of what they call Nai Mongol, which is Inner Mongolia, the reality is that it was subjugated by the Chinese Communist Party. Ideally, Inner Mongolia should be part of Mongolia. Anything north of the Great Wall of China is not Chinese territory, has never been. So the Chinese use a very convenient term called autonomous region, which actually means nothing, which means we run the show, okay? Just like the Tibetans, they claim is an autonomous region. It's not an autonomous region. They run the show and they do aggressive demographic change. They have been doing it, they continue to do it. So you replace the ethnic Mongols with the ethnic Han Chinese. So Inner Mongolia is one of the autonomous regions, and this is one of the autonomous regions that when the breakup of China happened, then when would a breakup of China happen? A breakup of China would happen when the economic progress juggernaut that Deng Xiaoping started almost now 50 years ago ends, right? You can fool the people with greed, but eventually when they start demanding their rights because things are going wrong and economically they're suffering, what do? In India, the concept is different. Okay, we have a democratic federal setup. So if there is a popular movement, we've seen the reorganization of states. Just a few years ago, you've seen the state of Telangana come up. Okay, popular movement through democracies elect leaders, and elected leaders bring upon internal change. That's one way of approaching it, and the other way of approaching is the all or nothing way. Dictatorships are great until they fall apart, because they do not have within them the system to adopt and change to any mass movement. A mass movement in China has not been seen for a few years, but when it comes, Inner Mongolia will be one of the first places that will break off and head and become ideally reintegrated with the country of Mongolia.
Absolutely, Rishabh. Let's also then, if you can shed some light on some other regions like Guangxi.
Okay, that's the other autonomous province of China. Now Guangxi, Inner Mongolia is right in the north. Guangxi is a bit more towards the south of China. It was ruled by the Sen dynasty up until very recently. The Qing dynasty, with the name of China comes from the Qing. The Qing dynasty, up until 1726, recognized this as an independent state, and they did nothing about it. They were not invading it. They didn't try to move in. Throughout, once they did make it part of China through conquest, throughout the 18th century, which is up until 1885, this region was in a state of constant turmoil and revolt. They seceded from Qing China during the imperial collapse in 1911. So they officially seceded and said, we are forming a separate country, thank you very much. And the irony is that the very infamous Deng Xiaoping tried to do a Communist Party revolt in this seceded province. So once the Chinese breakup happened and Guangxi became a separate province, guess who was there? Deng Xiaoping. He tried to do a communist revolt here in 1929 and they failed. Okay, and throughout the 1920s, this was an area of major civil war between the Republican Chinese, the Sun Yat-sens of the world. He died, of course. It was throughout a difficult turmoil period. It remained in unrest, and today still they consider it as a place with one system, two ways of government, two rights, an autonomous region. And this is another area of China, Guangxi, that once the breakup of China happens, this is another area that secedes once again. So people keep asking, breakup of China never going to happen? You just need to look back exactly 110 years, and the breakup of China did happen. It fell apart into all these competing territories after the imperial dynasty ends. So if this happened when the imperial dynasty ends, what happens when the 100 years of CCP rule end? Something similar.
Absolutely. And at the same time, Rishabh, there are some more autonomous regions like Xinjiang. If you can also tell us a little bit about that.
Xinjiang is very often in the news these days because of the fundamental reason of what the Chinese are doing with the Uyghurs, right? The people, the ethnic people of Xinjiang are not Chinese. They are not Han. Okay, they are a Caucasian race. Remember the Caucasus, the Caucasus are a mountain range in Georgia. So these are Caucasian people. They have cultural similarities with the Indo-Iranians. And the reason they have cultural similarity with the Indo-Iranians is because they were part of the initial Turkic Khaganates. Okay, now this was a region in part of the Chagatai Khaganate. Now the Chagatai Turks are the same branch to which the Mughals in India claim descendancy from. In their lineage, they look to the Chagatai Turks in the area around Samarkand. So Mughal India had more connections to Xinjiang in China, which they are currently oppressing, than the Chinese ever did. And that's the reality. Now the Qing dynasty did bring Xinjiang under its control. And what the Qing dynasty did in Xinjiang is exactly what the CCP is doing right now. What they did was that the major cities, they filled them with Han people, and they dispersed the local Uyghur population, many of them who were Muslims, all over the province. So they were simply, by spreading them thin, they removed the potency of the threat, and all the major cities were populated by Han people. The same policy that the CCP is doing now. They're bringing in Han from all over the country to settle in the capital of Xinjiang, the major cities. They take over all the businesses, and then you lock up all the men. You ensure the women have to find Han husbands, and you do not only demographic change, you do DNA change. This is what's happening in Xinjiang. So I think it won't be news to many people that if the CCP of China were to collapse, okay, which will be the third biggest collapse in the last 100 years. So the Imperial China collapses, Republic China collapses, and then the People's Republic, which is Communist China, collapses. And if the breakup of China would happen, Xinjiang would be one of the first largest provinces that would actually be wiped out.
At the same time, Rishabh, let's also talk about Ningxia. If you can tell us a little bit about that.
Ningxia is a very, very small province. Okay, and Ningxia historically for the Chinese, during the time of the Chinese kingdoms, of the imperial dynasty, there was a small area which they kept as a frontier area to deal with the Mongolian invasions. So this is the area which is right next to the Great Wall of China. And what the emperors of China would do is that they would have military outposts. They would not rule the territory, but the territory would have their military outposts, and these were basically outposts to warn of any activities of a raid or of an invasion that was coming in from Mongolia. So it's a very tiny province. They've tried mixing and matching with various provinces, including Inner Mongolia. In the past, it hasn't worked, so they've given it its own autonomous status. And it was mostly uninhabited for most of its history. It has a population now, not very large by Chinese standards, but this is a small area which was never again really a part of China. And if you again look at a breakup of China, if the CCP rule ends, this would be one of the things, autonomous region that splits apart, secedes from the People's Republic of China.
And Rishabh, of course, the most contentious would be Tibet, if we can also talk about that.
So as I was mentioning, the Chinese divide Tibet into two halves. That's not the reality. Okay. They call it Xizang, which is the Tibet of Lhasa, and they call it Qinghai, which is the Tibet which is on the other side of the Himalayas, closer to the Chinese mainland. They call that Qinghai. Now, most of modern Qinghai and even Sichuan province in China, most of this is the huge plateau of Tibet. And there is no geographical going away from that. The political, cultural going away from that, you can still argue. But there's no going off. The map of Tibet, as the Tibetan government in exile here in India recognizes this, incorporates all of Qinghai and parts of Sichuan. So Tibet would in fact be a large country of its own right, were they not dominated by the Chinese and being crushed by the Chinese as they are right now. It would in fact be of almost equivalent size as proper China. The 18 provinces of the eastern seaboard, Tibet would almost be the same size if you would compile, maybe about 75% of the same size if you were to compare the landmass of all the eastern provinces. Now we know a lot about Tibet, but the reality is that it is easier to access Tibet from the Indian side in Ladakh and Aksai Chin than it is to do it from the area around Qinghai or from Sichuan. Now the Chinese have done it. They've built the roads, they've built the railways. They have a railway from Qinghai going into Lhasa. So they've done it. But that was a forced route. The natural route was through Aksai Chin. So Tibet not only is culturally dissimilar because it has a Buddhist race, Buddhist people compared to the Han Chinese, the accessibility of Tibet is actually from India, and that's why Tibet is Buddhist. Buddhism went to Tibet from India via Ladakh, which is why you have the Dalai Lama, which is why you have the monasteries in Tibet, because they went from India. Everybody knows Buddhism originated in India, so why Tibet? That's the reason. And there were times in the very recent past where the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir would claim part of Tibet as part of his realm. Okay, and as I was just mentioning, both the Yellow River, which is the major, and the Yangtze, the two major Chinese rivers, both of them, the Brahmaputra also incidentally, but both of the major Chinese rivers all originate in Tibet, the Tibetan plateau, okay, north of the Himalayas. And the front running of all these rivers, the first few hundred kilometers of all these rivers are all in Tibet. They don't form a part of China. It's only the eastern downstream parts of these two rivers that were actually a part of China. So even today the Chinese have divided Tibet into two. They call Xizang the autonomous region of Tibet, Qinghai they call a province. The reality is the whole thing, including parts of Sichuan, are one thing, a free Tibet. And if the Communist Party of China were to collapse, this would obviously be the first entity that would reclaim its independence, and Lhasa would be the capital of a country and not a province.
Absolutely. Rishabh, then let's also talk about the northeast of China. There are several provinces within the eastern part of China as well.
It's a very fascinating story because China also has a northeast, okay? And this northeast of China, which was erstwhile Manchuria, is just north of the Korean peninsula. So you have South Korea, North Korea, and then you have northeast of China. In fact, that's why the Chinese were so deeply involved with the Korean War. It's the Chinese who actually went in to fight on the North Korean side. So if you put this into perspective, this is an underdeveloped part of China. Okay, they keep talking about revival of Northeast China, revival of the Northeast China. They haven't done anything. It's an underdeveloped part of China. And again, it has no roots connected to the Han race of the Chinese, which is still 90% of the Chinese. So you look at the three major provinces that form part of erstwhile Manchuria. The first and the biggest of them is a place called Heilongjiang. Okay. Now the Heilongjiang area, these are again Mongolic people. They were known as the Mongolic Donghu people. Okay, who are the original descendants. That's the ethnic minority that lives in this particular province. Many times it was in either Mongol rule or under Korean rule, a Manchurian rule at many times. And it was the Qing dynasty claimed only a small western part. Even in claiming, forget actually being able to rule over, even in claiming they only claimed a small western part of this. And for most of its history, because of the very powerful kingdoms that were operating here and dynasties operating here, it was a no-go area for the Han rulers of China. They would not enter this place of northeast Manchuria. They won't go to it. And the only reason, Devika, and this is a fascinating story, the only reason a place like Heilongjiang is a part of the People's Republic, Communist Republic of China, is because it is right next to Russia. So the communists of the Soviet Union, Stalin, were backing the Chinese Communist Party to take over from the Chiang Kai-sheks and the Kuomintang. So even though this was never a part of China, this was the first area that the Russians conquered, and then they handed the keys to Mao Zedong and the CCP. So even though it never formed a part of China, the reason it's the day of a part of the People's Republic is because the Russians, it was a border area for the Russians to go into and conquer. So the military support that could come in from Russia, or the USSR rather, was very heavy. And why did Russia get involved here? Russia got involved not just for the CCP and the Communist Revolution. Russia got involved because the Japanese were ruling Manchuria. They treated Manchuria like a colony. So the Russians were fighting off against the Japanese during the Second World War. This is history, we all know it. We only talk about the Western Front or the Pacific Front. There was a huge war that was raging between the Japanese and the Russians. It started at called the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, which was the first shots fired. Literally of the Second World War, the first shots didn't happen in Poland. They happened in the Battle of Khalkhin Gol. People who became top leaders of the Russian army gained most of their expertise fighting on the Eastern Front against the Japanese. So the Russians got involved because of the Japanese. And this is why an area that was never a part of China today is a part of the People's Republic of China. And then you have, of course, the two other provinces south of that.
Right, and those two provinces are, Rishabh, Kirin and Liaoning, if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So Kirin is also known as Jilin. Jilin, again, this was an area where the Russians or the Soviet Union fought off the Japanese. And that is why it is part of modern day China for no other reason. It was actually occupied by the USSR in 1945 before they handed over the keys to the People's Republic in 1949 after Mao's revolution. It has nothing to do ethnically with China. It has nothing to do politically with China. It was defeated and as a conquered territory gifted to the Chinese. That's what happened with this area.
And what happened to Liaoning?
Now, so Liaoning, so if you look at Manchuria, so in the northeastern extremity of Manchuria is Heilongjiang, then you have Jilin, and then you have Liaoning. Liaoning is the third, they're known as the eastern provinces of China. This is the third eastern province. Now again, most of the people here are of Korean descent, they are not of Chinese descent. They spent very little, just a few years, under Ming dynasty rule, and mostly were ruled by various dynasties of the Manchu people. Now it was here in this area in Liaoning that the Japanese in 1931 created what was historically infamous as the Mukden incident. So what the Japanese basically did is that they had a false flag operation. They went and blew up their own railway. Okay, and they used that as a pretext to get in more ships and troops from Japan to conquer the rest of Manchuria. So this was the area where the Japanese and the Soviets were facing off. This was a Japanese colony at one point of time. The Japanese did a whole host of atrocities to the people of Manchuria, and that is historically figuring on the Japanese conscience. But this area was never traditionally a part of China, and if the Communist Party of China was to collapse, and if Communist China were to end, this would be one of the first areas that would break up.
And Rishabh, if we were to move on to some, the better known places, the erstwhile colonies of Hong Kong and Macau.
Yeah, so the Hong Kong was the British colony, handed over to the Chinese in 97. Macau was the Portuguese colony, handed over to the Chinese in 1999. The fact that the Westerners left, very good, they left. But you're seeing what's happening in Hong Kong right now. Okay. You compare what's happening with Hong Kong to what the Portuguese exited here in India a few decades ago, but what they exited here in India. Think of Pondicherry, think of Daman and Diu. Okay, Pondicherry has an elected assembly with the chief minister. And now think of Macau and Hong Kong, what they're going to do. So Hong Kong has been the financial center for the Chinese for many. Its importance for the Chinese has come down. But once upon a time it accounted for 20% of all financial dealings for entire China. Now it's a few percent. Macau is, a lot of people would know it as a tourist destination. It's not a very large area. It has a casinos and all, so it's a tourist destination for Chinese and other people also. But these places are obviously uncomfortable with the authoritarian nature of Chinese rule. And you know what's happening in Hong Kong. They don't want to be a part of China. Their democratic rights have been stripped as of just a few days ago. Under new laws, Hong Kong will no longer have the life and liberty it enjoyed under guarantees that were given when the British handed over Hong Kong back to the Chinese in 1997.
Absolutely. Rishabh, let's also then talk about one very, of course, big contentious region of Taiwan. which has been a big headache for China.
So the Chinese claim Taiwan as a province. Okay, the Taiwanese beg to differ, and it is only because of the rest of the world that Taiwan has a unique role of being neither independent nor a part of mainland China. It's only because of the rest of the world that we guys choose not to recognize Taiwan and have diplomatic ties at the ambassador level. We guys, that means the Americans, the Indians, and others. We can choose to change it, and the day we change it, Taiwan would become an independent country because operationally it is. Are the Chinese threatening to invade Taiwan? They have been since the 1950s. There have been 4 major Taiwan Straits crises, and we've done another YouTube video recently on this. You can watch that. All the way from the 1950s all the way till the time of Bill Clinton. And every time the Americans have gone in and they've sent in their aircraft carriers and their ships and they've prevented a Chinese invasion. The same is going on right now. The Americans have sent in their ships because the Chinese are fiddling around once again. So do they want to occupy Taiwan? Yes. Do the Taiwanese want to be part of China, of a communist China? Absolutely not. But in this case, Devika, the opposite might happen. That if the communist China were to fall, and the communist regime in the 100 years of communist, not 100 years, but 100 years of communist party existence and about 80 years of communist party rule were to end, Taiwan would actually perhaps be reintegrated. Formosa would actually be reintegrated with the rest of China rather than become an independent entity, but it could go both ways because the Taiwanese have free elections. They've recently elected a president in January this year. Her swearing in ceremony was attended by 2 Indian MPs, including Meenakshi Lekhi. So this is a known thing that Taiwan, in all but name, is an independent country already.
All right, Rishabh, let's also then talk about Yunnan.
Okay, Yunnan and Xinjiang are the 2 other important provinces to talk about. Xinjiang, I've been briefly talking about, is again considered an autonomous region. Now, specifically for Xinjiang, the identity of the people, they look at themselves, and up until 1949, they were a free country. Okay, they called themselves East Turkestan, and they still look at themselves as either East Turkestan or Uyghurstan. And if you interact with people who are natives, ethnics, they will identify not with China, they will as Chinese, they will identify themselves as East Turkestanis or Uygurstanis or Uyghurs. Okay, and that's their national identity. It's not their regional identity. Okay, it's their national identity. And they were until 1949 an independent area of China, now an autonomous area of China. Now, the majority population is non-Han and a significant 10 million minority population of Uyghurs. Xinjiang in itself was part of what are called the Kashgar. Kashgar is you can Google it. It's one of the preeminent medieval empires. Khotan, Kucha. They belong to not the Chinese empires. They belong to the empires that were the Indo-Iranian empires. I'm saying Indo-Iranian because of, Indo-Persia empires. Now, at one point of time, Xinjiang was part of the Chagatai Sultanate. Okay, so these are also people who are Chagatai Turks. They have Mongol lineage, Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan. Think Kublai, think Genghis. Don't think Chinese emperor in Beijing. You mentioned Yunnan. Now, the Han dynasty, the Han people, the Han dynasty recognized Hunan as an independent state with whom they had diplomatic relations. Okay, it's a recognition. We're talking about 1,000 years ago. It was mostly controlled either by the Tibetans or the Mongols during various parts of its history, and even under the Ming and Qing dynasties, Yunnan was always considered as an independent feudal entity. As in suzerainty, they said, okay, fine, you're sitting in Beijing, but we are an independent feudal entity, and they had their own dynasty. So geographically, you have Xinjiang, okay, which is towards the extreme west of China, okay. Then you have Tibet. So Xinjiang is Aksai Chin, north of Aksai Chin, so north of J&K, okay. Then you have Tibet, and Tibet goes all the way up until up until Bhutan and Arunachal, and covers the border between Myanmar and China. Part of that border is Tibet, and the rest of the Myanmar-China border is Yunnan. So that puts you into perspective of where Yunnan is. So absolutely to the southern extremity of China, and up until very recently an independent feudal entity. So if the Communist Party of China were to collapse, which means the Chinese state collapses, Yunnan would be another area that you should watch out for becoming its own feudal entity.
Okay, Rishabh, so then to sum it up, if you can just tell us, if all of these provinces and regions were to go away, what would we be left with?
If you can imagine a map of China, and I've explained to you, proper China is the eastern seaboard, okay, of the Shanghais and the Guangdongs and all the way up to Beijing. Okay, that's proper China, the rich part of China, where all the economic growth has happened. Okay, as soon as you start moving west, you start moving north, you start moving northeast. So if you take away Yunnan, for example, which is almost 500,000 square kilometers, you take away Inner Mongolia, which is almost more than 1 million square kilometers, you take away Xinjiang, which is 1.7 million square kilometers, you take away proper Tibet, okay, that's 2 million square kilometers, you take away Manchuria, which is the northeast provinces of China, they add up to 1.5 million square kilometers. You hit almost 6.8 to 7 million square kilometers. China, modern day China, as they try to describe themselves on their map, is 10 million square kilometers. 2/3 of the land mass of China is either autonomous regions, okay, or provinces that have nothing to do with China, gifted by the Soviets, provinces that have closer linkages with India than they do with the Chinese. 2/3, Devika, of China potentially breaks away. So is a balkanization of China very, very imminent? Perhaps not happening next week, not happening next month. The single premise for the balkanization, which means the breakup of China, very similar to what happened to Yugoslavia and what happened to the USSR, happens when the Communist Party of China collapses. It last happened in 1911 when the imperial dynasty collapsed. So it has happened before. It happened once again. Remember, Communist China exists because China was at civil war. Okay? Up until 1949 when the civil war ended. And even then it carried on because Chiang Kai-shek, Kuomintang guys went to Taiwan. So technically that never ended. Okay. So if you think that drastic shakeups in China are rare and never happen, that's absolutely wrong. Just the past 100 years tells you that you've seen it happen in 1911, collapse of the imperial dynasty. You've seen it happen in a massive civil war that carried on through the Second World War up until 1949. You had a period of CCP rule, and the period of CCP rule has happened at the end of a gun and at the end of economic riches. You can keep people happy by just getting them to richer. Eventually, once you peak out and they start asking for other things, you can't. So is a breakup of China imminent? No. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. Can it happen? Absolutely yes. And what will be the precursor? Internal dissension that leads to a weakening, if not a breakup, of the Chinese Communist Party. Many people are already leaving the CCP as we speak in their hundreds of thousands. Okay. And then the people of Tibet, the people of the Uyghurs of Xinjiang, the people of Manchuria, the people of Inner Mongolia, who are Mongols, none of these are Han people. The people of Yunnan, all these people say, hang on, we are happy running our own affairs and running our own country. We don't want you Han Chinese dictating to us what to do. And Tibet claims what it actually was, not what the Chinese say currently it is today, Devika.
Well, thank you so much, Rishabh. That was an extensive explanation of what China is really all about today and whether it is possible that the balkanization of China will happen sometime in the future. That was Rishabh Gulati's analysis. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like the video, do share it.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.